All right. Eleanor, tell us about your whirlwind trip recently. I think this group will be interested in it.
For sure. So I spent some time recently in Kerala, in southern India, without being bitten by a dog. I don't know what Mr. John Healy did wrong there. So we are doing some work with the Keralan government. Keralan's the southernmost state in India. It's a really interesting place because they've got a fabulous education system. 40% of the graduates out of the Keralan higher education system are women, not the case across India. So they have a highly educated female workforce as well as a generally high level of education. However, they're facing a challenge because people are leaving the state. So they finish their education and they leave. They go to Bangalore, they go to Mumbai, they go to Delhi, they go to the places where the big aggregators of jobs are based, the Wipro TCS, the global service providers. And the government has got a mission, they call it the Kerala Knowledge Economy Mission, to retain the citizens locally and offer them opportunities for meaningful work, which will allow them to be based locally within Kerala, all of which will contribute to the local economy and the culture and everything else. So what we're doing with them is helping them understand how, alongside creating permanent employment, there are opportunities for economic and personal growth for the businesses and the individuals in Kerala to benefit from incorporating freelancing in the way that they think about work. This is a really big change. So the best example I can give is, it was explained to me, if a girl goes home to daddy and says, I've met this wonderful boy, he earns £150,000 a year, he's a freelancer, daddy will say you are not allowed to marry this boy. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Freelancing is not seen as a meaningful career path. And so we've got some big cultural hurdles to get over. However, we're pulling together a strategy for them, which will really help to accelerate adoption of freelancing, and very exciting project. On a completely different but incredibly related note, I then went on to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh, where I was speaking at a conference which is about the future of tech in the economic growth of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And there too, they are really interested in exploring freelancing as a way of creating meaningful economic opportunity, both for the kingdom as a whole and the businesses that are there, and in the underrepresented parts of their workforce or inactivated parts of the workforce, particularly women, actually. And so there are certain parallels, at the same time as it is incredibly different. It's a very first world country. There's very little by way of labour arbitrage there. They're very highly educated, they're very motivated, but they have some different challenges, both culturally, same issue. If a girl goes home and says, my future husband is a freelancer, daddy says no. So similar challenges as well as some quite different ones. So the thing that I'm learning is that there are common problems or hurdles to get over when it comes to driving freelance adoption. And there are some really different ones. So as usual, we have to listen and ask brilliant questions if we're going to help these government bodies. But it's great to see that at a government level, people are looking to drive meaningful change in the way that they think about and enable freelance working. So that's my story.
How many people were at that LEAP event again?
The LEAP event was amazing. So they had predicted 100,000 visitors to the LEAP event. On day one, they had to close the doors because the number of visitors hit 200,000. Amazing.
Yeah.
So I've never been to an event where they've sent messages to everybody there saying, stop coming. If you know anyone who's coming, stop them coming. There were 3-hour traffic jams getting into the site on the second day because so many people wanted to beat the queues.
Wow.
It was extraordinary. And they had everything from all the big software companies you've heard of. The zone that I was in was about the creative economy. So there are lots of gaming companies. They had drones, they had AR, they had VR, they had every gadget you could get excited about, as well as some really dull stuff to do with accounting software. So it could light all sorts of fires.
All right. All right, with that, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Barry, who's going to do some introductions for us, for our guests.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, super excited to be able to introduce our guests in a second, because I've long thought that the way we work is outdated, that having to fit our lives around our work is sort of the opposite of the way it should be, and we should be able to be more Rob. We should be able to spend more time doing our art and be able to make our work fit around our lives. And meeting Lizzie Penny and Alex Hirst, as I did last year, or maybe it was the year before, I don't know, and then getting to know them a bit and having them on the podcast and learning a little bit about their Workstyle, the book that they then published, and the name that they gave to that topic that I've been thinking about, like, you know, that the way we work being outdated, and we must be able to fit the way we work around the way we live, and we would be healthier and wealthier, and it's, you know, better for well-being, productivity, and society, as it said here. It's such a sort of milestone. It's like, there is a sort of a concept, there's a movement, there's a noun. It's called Workstyle, and we've been using it ever since. So delighted to have you guys join us on the community call. I sort of feel in awe of what you guys have achieved. Sunday Times bestseller. They're like celebrities in the literary world now. So we are delighted to have you join us. So thank you very much. And I'll hand over to you guys.
Thank you for having us. I mean, it's quite the introduction. Certainly we don't feel like celebrities, I don't think. I think that comes with a huge amount of expectation to be awesome. But we are just Lizzie and Alex, and you know, we wrote the book, but it's based on an idea that we came up with 8 years ago. And the reason we wrote the book was, well, we were getting asked an awful lot during the pandemic, how do you do what you do? You know, but prior to the pandemic, people kind of looked at us a little bit sideways and wondered what on earth we were talking about when we were saying, you know, we all work whenever and wherever we choose. So the book is out there to help everybody understand the idea and to learn from all of the principles that we've been applying for the last 8 years. But really it's there to drive wholesale change now that we see this post-pandemic inflection point that we're in right now as a real opportunity to change people's mindsets at a total level and at a global scale. So hence the book, hence why we're trying to get into the hands of as many people as possible, and just welcome the conversation about Workstyle with anyone who'll listen. And hopefully, you know, the Open Assembly group is a more educated and forward-thinking group than many of perhaps the others that we may have spoken to. So it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for having us.
So we're just going to start by talking a little bit about who we are and what led us to this point. So as Alex says, we came up with the idea of Workstyle and the word Workstyle in the pub where all great ideas are formed 8 and a bit years ago now. But Alex and I had been on quite different personal journeys to lead us to that conversation in the pub. So Alex, do you want to tell yours and then I'll chip in with that?
Absolutely. So prior to that conversation in the pub, I'd already reached burnout and realised that I needed to make some pretty major changes to the way I lived and worked. Prior to that, I would wake up at 5:30, leave the house at 6:30, get to the office at 7:30 and get home 12 hours later. And I would do that 5 days a week on the basis that I couldn't physically give any more than that. And that if I was giving all that I could physically give, then surely that was enough. And that was me kind of validating my contribution on the basis of how much time I spent doing work. So having kind of reached the point of burnout, it actually took my wife, Sarah, telling me that I'd become a shadow of myself for me to realise that something had to change. So we went away for a week to Spain on holiday. And I can't tell you much about that holiday at all because I wasn't actually present enough to be forming any memories of it. And that was really the realisation when I got home and came to the conclusion that actually this was probably a mental health challenge that needed more than time away to fix. I needed to rethink my relationship with work and develop a new contract with work psychologically that wasn't based on how many hours I was putting in, but was actually more based on what the value of my work was, what the outcomes were, the contribution, the impact, and things like that, that meant that when and where I was working became entirely irrelevant, actually. And so that was kind of the basis of the conversation that I took to the pub that night with Lizzie, which is to be measured and start thinking about my value in terms of output rather than input.
And so for me, it was quite a different story that led me to the pub. For me, it was having my first child, my son Finn, that really fully opened my eyes to enduring inequalities at work. And I think until then, I'd been relatively ignorant about people who were being excluded structurally from work. But suddenly, I didn't want to be at an office during Finn's every waking hour. I actually wanted to work during nap times or in the evening because I didn't go out anymore because I had a small child. And so that got me to the same point that Alex was at, that I wanted to be judged on my output rather than kind of being judged on a traditional working structure. And so we came up with the concept of Workstyle, but actually for me, the biggest proof points have been since we came up with the concept. So after we came up with this word Workstyle, because we believed that there weren't any kind of words that weren't already loaded with prejudice, like shirking from home, being a part-timer or flex fest, we came up with the word Workstyle as this kind of neutral language where you could say to someone, what's your work style? And we started using it and we found that actually, when we used it, people would use it back to us in the same sentence. So we started working this way ourselves and started a business called Hoxby, working this way. But then actually I've come to really understand the critical importance of this myself since then, because during my second pregnancy with my twin daughters, Zoe and Megan, I had serious complications that resulted in me having surgery at 23 weeks pregnant and then being on bed rest for 9 weeks. And being able to work in a Workstyle way during those 9 weeks was just transformative for me. It meant I could escape into a digital working world where hardly anyone knew about my personal circumstances because I was being judged on my output, and all our communication was on Slack and Google Meet, and be distracted essentially from my long anxiety-ridden days in bed. And against the odds, both our daughters survived. And the day we couldn't get their double pram through the front door of our London flat, we decided to move to Bristol across the country, which we were lucky to be able to do with no disruption at all to my career. And then fast forward a couple of years and out of the blue, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which completely turned my world upside down, as you can imagine. But again, Workstyle working was my outlet, and it meant that I could have some positive distraction in the chemotherapy chair. I could have a way of cancer not completely filling my thoughts all the time, and I could work as much or as little as I felt up to that day or week. And almost unbelievably, since then, my husband's been diagnosed with cancer. It's almost laughable. But now I see Workstyle again from another perspective, because what it means is that I understand how when you're caring for someone, it's also really important to be able to work in your own way to preserve your own sense of identity, but also to fit your work around your life. So I think what started out as something that for me was about fitting work around parenting has become something so much bigger. It's become so integral to my life, and it makes me deeply connected about wanting to promote this way of working to as many people as possible.
We often talk about, sorry, go yes. Yeah, and we often talk about how life changes and every life is different. We obviously couldn't have foreseen that any of that would happen, and it was a far cry from the conversation we were having in the pub, where we were coming up with hand gestures to describe just how revolutionary Workstyle is. And throughout the book, there are lots of hand gestures to keep you amused and keep you entertained along the way, with some other more witty illustrations. But yes, so Workstyle is the freedom to choose when and where you work for yourself, to define it for yourself, and fundamentally to fit work around life rather than life having to fit around work.
Does anyone have any questions at this point before we go on to talk a bit more about it?
I had a question that I thought of. You both reached a level of burnout in your previous jobs that got you to this tipping point. Do you think there's things that could have happened at your work that would have kept you there, like if they had had other systems in place, like Workstyle, or was that not possible?
Yeah, and actually that's something that we do explore in the book, because the thing that we're trying to do now is, having worked this way ourselves for the last 8 years, and we've got 500 people in the Hawkesby community also working this way, and we work with big clients like AIA, Merck, Unilever, Divine Chocolate, one of my personal favorites. So what we've been trying to do is running an experiment, basically a big experimental community working this way. But the thing we've tried to do is almost decode what are the most important lessons for other organizations. And we kind of sum those up in 3 ways. So the first is be digital first, not physical first, which for you guys, I'm sure isn't a giant leap. But for a lot of people, it is a big leap. And even for Alex and I, who come from more traditional work backgrounds, that's a big change of mindset. The second thing is be asynchronous rather than synchronous. So have your default way of working being that you each work on your individualized way of working with your own time frame, and use collaborative tools to underpin that really facilitate it. And then the third thing is about the importance of being trust-based. So that's something that takes investment of time and often money at a leadership level, to have an organization that is trust-based, where people can be judged on their outputs. And so the thing that we're looking at now is, how can we take this way of working to other organizations? How can we start them on the journey of autonomous working, individualized working, so that this doesn't have to be just the premise of a freelancer to have the autonomy to do that? That organizations actually can provide the right infrastructure and the right ways of working for them to have, for all their employees to live happy and more fulfilled lives by being able to work this way. So that is something that we're keen to be a catalyst, and we're hopeful the book will be a catalyst as well to inspire change.
I'll just build onto that, and sorry, I know that Ashley's got her hand up as well, but I think Lizzie's talked there about autonomous work, and we talked a little bit about freelancing earlier, and that terminology conjures up perceptions, like rightly or wrongly, for better or worse. But what we're really talking about, and probably what would have helped me back in 2014 when it was to have had autonomy, more autonomy over when and where I worked. There's lots of desk research out there that proves that autonomy is better for work-life balance, better for job satisfaction, for engagement, for productivity. It's also better for reducing stress and staff turnover and exhaustion. So there's already been stacks of evidence about why autonomy is better for people, better for business, better for companies. But for me as a worker, I didn't feel like I had that complete autonomy. I could have had more. I felt like I had to be somewhere for an amount of time, and that was the criteria upon which my performance was being measured more than anything else. And actually, when we talk about autonomy, and we've obviously implemented autonomy to the greatest degree within Hawkesby, giving everybody freedom to choose their own work styles, to work together. With that comes accountability. You can't have autonomy without accountability. The two go hand in glove. So one can be accountable for our output and given autonomy to decide how we get there, if, as Lizzie said, we're in a trust-based environment and we have the tools to collaborate and the assumptive ways of working to make that possible. So really, Workstyle is about enabling autonomy, and it's the thing that we've researched within Hawkesby as well over the last now 4 years, looking at the link between autonomy and productivity. And what we've discovered, and what the book goes into a little bit more detail on than I will now, is that well-being explains the link between autonomy and productivity. So increased autonomy improves well-being, and as a result, productivity goes up. So well-being is the thing that makes us more productive. And if we can choose when and where we work, we can look after ourselves better and be more productive at the same time. So that's really the, I guess, the proof point, the real world example within Hoxby that we think substantiates all of the desk research into autonomy and its potential benefits. And therefore, it's very exciting. And we think that the world should be aiming for autonomous work rather than flexible work or hybrid work or remote work. Let's enable autonomous work as our ambition, and Workstyle makes that possible. Sorry, I think there's probably other questions, actually.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, I just want to chime in here. So I love what you're all doing. I think there's so much talk about what enterprises and organizations can do and what responsibility they have to create autonomous work. But from where I sit, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a huge gap in the market in terms of educating the worker on how they work best, right? And going introspectively, right? And saying and figuring, like having that self-awareness. Like, so what education and revolutionary ideas and what responsibility do you feel you have, and whose responsibility is it to educate the worker to understand how they work best, when they work best, and feel like they have the confidence to go find meaningful and autonomous work?
Yeah. Shall I start with an answer to that, Lizzie? So really, the book is written with people in mind, first and foremost. So we're hoping to open people's eyes and minds to the idea that it's within their control now to be thinking about when and where they work, rather than blindly assuming that they work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or some variant of it, which is actually a 200-year-old system, by the way. It predates electricity, never mind the personal computer or the internet. So this is about, firstly, the book is about saying, guys, this is now something you can own, control, and decide for yourself. This is something that we can help you with, and the book gives lots of tools and practical guidance. But really, we think it's there's two sides to it. Obviously, there's how do we affect organizational design, but the other is what do we do to enable people to take ownership of their work styles. And that's kind of why we're talking about it as a work style revolution, which is actually that we think that the quickest way to drive change is to empower people to take ownership for it and to start demanding it, particularly in a post-pandemic world where people and companies are looking for answers. We've got one that we can put into the hands of people to say, look, this is what I want. I've thought about how I work best. I understand my strengths and what I deliver and in terms of value. And here's my work style. And this is what I expect you to enable me to have. And to flip the conversation completely on its head. So rather than this being about organizations mandating when and where people work, actually just enabling people to define that for themselves and putting the expectation back onto the company to accommodate that individuality. And that's where we think that the real opportunity is for huge improvements to not only individual well-being and productivity, but wholesale mass inclusion of the workforce. People like Lizzie was talking about earlier, who are excluded from work because they can't get to an office or because they can't access a 9 to 5 job. So
we're transitioning into Lucas's brilliant question here, which I'll just pick up and continue Alex's sentence that basically this is the thing that really excites Alex and I about Workstyle and the impact that it can have on society as a whole, which is that in the book we identify 7 groups who are structurally excluded from work. We also talk about those who are discriminated against at work, but there are 7 groups who are structurally excluded because they cannot, for whatever reason, work 5 days a week, 9 to 5 in an office. And that is not just parents. Parents is one of those groups, but it's older workers, carers, people with chronic illness, people living with a disability, people living with a mental health challenge, people who identify as neurodivergent. So actually, you have all of these people, and we've been working with the UK government in a labour markets inquiry that they've been doing. And as part of that, we've quantified that in the UK, that working in an autonomous way could bring up to 24 million people. It's almost too many to believe, but that's because we're not accounting for overlap into the workforce. So this is a massive, massive conversation that's happening about economic activity, about people who want to work but don't currently. And in the book, what we do is within each of those 7 groups, we look at the difference between the people in those groups who want to work and the people who do. So for one example, 77% of people with autism want to work, but only 26% do. That's a 51% gap. It's absolutely staggering. And that's because of the work environment for the most part. That if you feel there's too much sensory going on in an office, it just doesn't work to be able to go into that office, even with some adaptations. What you want is to be able to work in your own way. And so essentially what we're talking about is a way of working that levels the playing field. And actually, rather than saying, I'm in one of those groups, but I have to overcome certain challenges in order to survive and thrive in this world of work, it's saying we are going to create an individualized way of work where we embrace people's individuality, we judge them on their output and not any of the other factors that create bias at work. So that's the thing that really excites Alex and I, and how that we can transform society, but also transform businesses, because ultimately, if you bring diverse people together, you have better collective intelligence, you produce better outcomes as a result.
It's,
sorry. Go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say there's a question from Steve about how platforms that match workers to work fit into the concept. I think what we're talking about first and foremost is a global reset of the basic operating system of work. Let's throw out the idea that Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 in an office or in a fixed place is the way we work, because that is a notion that was conceived of when the majority of our work was being done in factories. In fact, if it was about 70, if not 80% of our work was being done in manufacturing or in the industrial economy at that time. It's now, that was, I think the service economy made up about 10 to 20% of the economy at that point, and it's now 70 to 80%. So the whole kind of macroeconomic context has changed, not to mention the fact that we now have technology that enables us to work anywhere and at any time, and that therefore the majority of the work that is being done by people, historically in offices and at desks, can be done anywhere and at any time, and therefore we need to completely reprogram the basis around which we think about work. Now, that calls into question, and the work that Lizzie and I have been doing with government, it starts to call into question the validity of the traditional employment model. And actually, should we be looking at something different, which is obviously mind-blowing to an extent, but really what we're talking about is the difference between whether someone is being engaged to provide a service over a period of time, and therefore an hours-based contract, or whether they're being asked to deliver an output, and therefore that would be a typically freelance-based contract. So I think what we're seeing is a shift in terms of the way that companies start to engage talent. They might bring them in on an hours-based contract or an output-based contract, but whether they use a platform to support the implementation of that, it's kind of up to them and up to the business case, the nuance of each business type. What's most important is that the way that they engage people, whether that's hours or output based, is also with work style in mind. So enabling people to decide for themselves when and where they work. And that really needs to become part of the contract that exists between person and company, which is that whether I'm delivering hours or output, I'm free to decide that for myself. And so that's kind of where we see this going.
Absolutely. But it does mean like you've got to adjust kind of and recalibrate the value proposition, right, from an hourly to an output, which is very much the taskification thing that we've been talking about here a lot, which is taskifying and getting the value of what the output is rather than arbitrarily trying to measure hours, although there are still a role for.
Agreed.
I think, Steve, that is a project. Since the book launched in the UK in October, and we found since Christmas quite a few organisations starting to come to us and saying, this is really interesting, how can I start to move to this way of working? And the thing that we recognise is that for them to move from time-based to output-based is huge. You don't just do that overnight. It's a cultural change, but it's also a detail change, because suddenly you're, rather than saying your contract is to be here for 37.5 hours a week, you have to really question, like, what is the output that you're getting to? And actually, should that be fragmented, or should that all sit with one person? So for us, we often say to people that this is a journey. This is, start it with a pilot, do it with one team that already work, similar to this way, try breaking it down just for one person, and I think that's where the freelance platform thing is relevant, because I think more often people will go to a freelance platform with a task in mind because they see something that needs to be delivered. Whereas the bigger leap is for those organizations where everyone is employed in traditional employment, because for them it's such a big leap forward. But equally, there is a war for talent at the moment. And if organizations don't do this, they will not attract and retain the best talent. So there is a business need as well as a kind of individual wellbeing society need as well.
I actually would even challenge the concept of recruit and retain being the right model anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's really access to the right talent at the right time. But I like I like your flexibility there, because I do think this isn't an all, or it's not a one way or the other thing. It is all of the different options you have to use all of them at the same time, in person and people that are in teams and individuals, tasks and hourly. And I think one of the mistakes we sometimes find is, especially in our conversations, is we're all looking at the one, whereas businesses actually have to look at lots of different solutions and how to do those all simultaneously, which I know OA is very much trying to be the insulator, right? And the adapter there. So I'll be quiet. Sorry. Thanks. This is great.
No, excellent point.
All valuable.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to ask a quick question, if I may.
Sure.
So you must have encountered quite a lot of skeptics, because I can imagine you talking about this. This is all very well. Oh yeah, this sounds great for those of you who can, sort of thing. But I can imagine traditional organizations. One of our children has just started work at an investment bank. He must be at his desk at 7:30 every morning in the city of London. He's there till like midnight. It's exactly, yeah. But it's and also I can imagine so many people going, oh yeah, this is all very well, but it'll never really take off. So how do you counteract the skeptics, or have you found that there's been skeptics since you've published the book, or has it been wholly positive reception? What are your thoughts?
So we haven't talked about this before, Barry. We haven't talked publicly about it. So Alex, shut me up if you want me to. But we wrote a section for the book called "For the Naysayers," which we never included in the book. We decided it was too negative to focus on the naysayers. But that was because over the years, we found so many people that kept saying, this won't work for me because it's just not right for my organization, because whatever. But then the book came from the pandemic, really, and us trying to kind of open source the way we worked. And it's incredible what the pandemic has done for individual mindsets and approach to work. We've gone from a world where all we did was try and persuade people that didn't believe we could work this way, to a world where actually it's remarkable how much people are looking for this. And I think even those organizations that are regressing, and we are seeing quite a few of them, oh, the pandemic's over, we want everyone back in the office 3 days a week, they're finding that's not straightforward, because there's been an enlightenment at an individual level. So even where the leaders of an organization say you should come back in, the individuals are saying, I don't want to do that anymore because I haven't been doing that before. I can see how I can work on my own terms and I want to keep doing that. So I think what's fascinating as we have more and more conversations about work style is that actually quite often at a leadership level, there's a level of reticence to it. But because the rest of the organization believes in change and wants to create this change, leaders are having to realize that it's not enough to say hybrid working is the future, because hybrid working doesn't go far enough. If there's 3 days in the office, then that's not what people are willing to do. They'll vote with their feet and they'll go and take other jobs instead. So would you agree, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think we sometimes forget that, you know, in the course of history and as we look back on this time, we're really just at the start of the digital revolution. And at the start of the Industrial Revolution, Luddites got up in arms and started breaking all of the kind of machinery that would take away their jobs because they felt like they were threatened by it and this wasn't the way that things should be done. But of course, it was inevitable that it would happen, that machinery would replace human labor in many of the factories. And really what we're seeing is a similar thing now, which is, but it's actually kind of probably the other way around now. It's being driven by people more and more post-pandemic. But prior to that, you'd get a lot more raised eyebrows and people saying, this feels like a pipe dream. And actually, you know, my work can't possibly be done anywhere, anytime, because I have to be in an office. Or actually, in some cases, it's probably true. You know, I have to perform brain surgery with the patient in front of me. But what we're saying, I think, right now is that we're at the start of a journey of change. And actually, the technology is probably going to determine the pace of that change more than anything. We're not even talking about blockchain and AI and how that might evolve the contractual relationship between a company and a person. But those sorts of things are going to change the shape and nature of work. And it's going to start in the easiest environment for that to happen. You know, that's probably not investment banks right now or hospitals. But what's happening in the service sector and in the creative sector and in the tech sector, where most of the work can be done anywhere at any time, is that's being developed. That understanding of how to do it is so we're right at the start of the adoption curve, but everything that gets learned by those people will get passed on and will permeate into other aspects of work, and eventually all work will be impacted by it. It's just a case of where we start and where it goes from there. Sorry,
and
I
there
can
are
see
some
lots of people
industries,
raising their hands.
there are some industries as well that I just think are more behind. Like, I think it's interesting, Barry, that you say about investment banking, for instance, because we've also heard that from someone who's read the book, was really inspired by it, but works in finance. And they've been in touch to say to us, thank you for giving me a language to start to have these conversations. And what they've told us is that actually these conversations are so at the beginning. It's about, you know, taking an hour at lunchtime to go to the gym. Like, it's the smallest things. And so I think there are certain industries where we might need a generational change to see real change, whereas there are other industries where I think organizations that used to have remote work are looking for a new source of competitive advantage. And so they are actively looking for, actually, remote work isn't enough anymore. What's the next thing I can do to keep attracting the best people and for us to be differentiated in how we work in a new way? So it really, there's a lot of variety, I think, at the moment. Alex, not Alex Hirst, Alex Buffett.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I look around the room and I see that most of us are well into the sort of balding, graying stages of our careers. And we've had 20 odd years of in-person interactions with our peers, colleagues, mentors, bosses. And so the question that I have for you is two-pronged. How do you think through or address or research the topics of mentorship and serendipity? So mentorship, the proximity with people who can help guide you in real time in your professional life, especially early on, because we have networks, right? We can do this. It's harder if you are just starting. And number two, the water cooler conversation. You know, I'm in the middle of a strategic creative process in my organization, and chopping it up in 30-minute Zoom calls has been an absolute nightmare in terms of getting to, organizational alignment. It's happening, but it's happening far slower than I would like. So curious to hear your thoughts on those two little things that being in person enables, I guess. And thanks.
It's so interesting because being in person does enable some things to happen, and things that we're really comfortable with because it's the way they've always been done. But it also creates some real problems at the same time. For example, the water cooler and spontaneity. And this is not really relevant in terms of aligning stakeholders behind a decision, but in terms of spontaneity, we've created a water cooler channel in Slack, right? So it's a place where people go for non-work social chat. It's full of pictures of cats, dogs, babies, and all the usual stuff that people bring to those channels. But it's not someone tapping you on the shoulder while you're in the middle of something important saying, hey, can I show you a photo of my cat? It's something you go to when you're looking for that. So you opt in and you have the autonomy to decide whether you want to go to hang out at the water cooler or not. And so I think that what you're able to do is remove the kind of interruptive nature of being in person and replace it with more conscious dialogue. And actually you can engage in water cooler conversation whenever you want or as much as you want, but it's a choice. So in terms of being able to connect with people in that way, you still can. But I think what's even more exciting is that you can connect with a lot of people. So our water cooler is the collective intelligence of over 500 people in Hoxby, bringing their respective wisdom on whatever the topic might be. So you can actually learn from anyone, anywhere in the world, if you organize it in such a way, rather than only being able to learn from whoever it is can get to the building and happens to be at the water cooler at the same time as you. So in terms of access to information and to knowledge and people, we actually have a really unique opportunity to benefit from the wisdom and knowledge of the world, actually, if we get it right, of one another. But we need to find ways to get comfortable with doing it in a different way and develop new skills that enable us to do that. So it's a different opportunity and a different way of, I guess, mentoring within that as well. I mean, we can come on to that in more detail, but learning from one another and passing information to one another happens differently.
I think the other thing that I would add is that we started our Hoxby experiment by saying anyone can do anything however they want. We don't dictate systems, you just do what you want. And we found it was complete carnage, it was just chaos. And what we then found was actually you do need to specify, like if everyone's being really productive, you do still need to specify, right, we use Google Suite, we never use email, we only use Slack. There are rules about how you use Slack. And this is, so we've got certain things that we put in place in order to make sure that we got to good outcomes quickly. Because that thing you're talking about Alex, about chopping up into half-hour Zoom calls, actually, that's exactly what we found to start with, was that we weren't structuring mindfully around how we were going to work asynchronously together in a way that respected work styles. We were kind of actually creating chaos instead. So at Hoxby, what we've done is we've kind of gone back to our tech stack. We've looked at not only what is the combination of tech we have, but also how do we want people to engage with each of those elements of technology when, in order to make things as productive as possible. And we don't have all the answers. We're still experimenting, new technologies coming out all the time. We're making lots of mistakes. But I think that's a really important part of this, that is, you can't just let everything be chaos. You need to put a framework around it in terms of what systems you use for what.
And I think this also is cultural. So within Hoxby, so we think of it as a community and a collective operating model. So it's non-hierarchical, it's far more distributed, and accountabilities are made clear through the scope of work for each person. So obtaining alignment between different stakeholders is much simpler because the decision-making groups are far smaller. So that's just a way of working as much as anything as well. And I think the way you structure your business and the way you culturally encourage collaboration to happen are really important to being able to make this kind of autonomous work succeed.
I love the way that when your Hoxbies start working with you, they have to write down their work style. So everybody has their work style sort of catalog. So they say, you know, I'm my work style is I've got young children. I like to take them to school, and so I like to do some work mid-morning, and then I like to, I don't know, work out in the afternoon, and then I'll come back online and work in the evening. And someone else will have something completely different. And so you're able to put teams together based on respecting their work style. And I love that concept.
Yeah. And you get to know the person as well, just simply by sharing your work style. And one of the things that we found at the start at Hoxby is that people would hide their background and not even turn their camera on and things like that when we were having conversations. And I think what Workstyle does is it enables you to shed some of the kind of the corporate self that you might otherwise have to bring to a work conversation. You don't need to be ashamed if you've got laundry hanging out behind you. That's irrelevant to how intelligent you are or how capable you are of solving the problem we're talking about. And so it humanizes work to a level that, you know, really should enable us to be at our best.
So I think we should say thank you, guys, because I know we're out of time and people are going to have to drop. This is the book. It's awesome. It really is a great read, actually, as well. Well, I'm not just saying that. It's one of the few businessy books that I actually finished. So thank you so much for
Praise
joining.
Indeed.
Brandon, what have we got to look forward to next call?
We're working on the agenda for the next call. I don't have it finalized yet, so I'm not going to mention anything, but stay tuned to your inbox. Something will be coming very shortly.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And thanks, Alex and Lizzie. Awesome.
Thanks, Alex and Lizzie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us. Great to meet you all.
Thanks,
Cheers.
guys, and good luck
Thanks
in
a lot, guys.
America.